All right, welcome to another one of Bike Hike Adventures webinars. This one is on Kilimanjaro. So we've started to do these webinars fairly frequently, and today we're addressing your top questions about Kilimanjaro. So Trish is sitting next to me ready to answer your questions. And Trish, you've climbed Kilimanjaro how many times now again?
Hi everyone, I have climbed 3 times. One of those times was I took a group up, we summited, we came down, and I said farewell to them as they went on safari and went up the very next morning with the next group.
So twice in one trip, wow.
Twice in one trip, which is normal for the local guides and the porters, but it was a big deal for me.
And then one other time, how many years apart were those trips?
Approximately 3 or 4 years apart. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, and so we're going to be taking your questions and the top questions that we've compiled based on all the emails that we get on a regular basis about Kilimanjaro, because it's one of those top destinations that everyone seems to want to go to. And then we're also going to take some spontaneous sort of written in emailed questions the last 5 or so minutes. So as always, if you'd like to ask a question during the course of the webinar, just type it in the little sidebar if you're logged in on the computer, or if you're just listening in and have access to email, you can send an email to info@bikehike.com, and I'll be checking the emails throughout. So let's dive into the first thing that we wanted to talk about, because we've got a lot to cover. There's a lot to cover with Kilimanjaro. But first, how long has Bike Hike been doing trips to Kilimanjaro? So you've been there 3 times, but how long has Bike Hike been doing Kilimanjaro?
Bike Hike has been doing trips in Kilimanjaro for 15 years. It was one of our first destinations many years ago, and it's been one of our popular destinations in all those 15-year time frame as well.
So what is the best, so the first of the questions is, what is the best time of year to go to Kilimanjaro, to trek Kilimanjaro?
So pretty much the best months are September and October, and January, February, and March. However, June, July, and August are also very good as well. It's just that during those months it's a little bit cooler, but you get clear views, so that's a very good time to go. Also, July and August are fantastic times to go because that's when the migration of the wildebeest happens. So if you're adding on safari, it's a very good time to be there as well.
Perfect. And what's the route one can take to get to Kilimanjaro in terms of flights? Where would someone fly into? What carriers could they take?
So you're pretty much flying into Kilimanjaro Airport, and there are not a lot of flights that basically go to Kilimanjaro Airport. The 2 main carriers are KLM, which is the one everybody wants, and that goes through Amsterdam, and the other one is Ethiopian Airlines. So everyone wants KLM. So prices tend to be pretty expensive, and they sell out pretty far in advance. So it's something you want to be looking at pretty far in advance, because it can get pretty pricey. And make sure you fly into Kilimanjaro Airport.
So yeah, it's Kilimanjaro International Airport with the airport code JRO.
Correct.
And so you said that we should go and we should look at flights early in advance. How early is early? Like if a person were wanting to go to Kilimanjaro, when would a person have to be looking at the flights?
I would start looking at flights at least 6 months in advance, if not more, because if there is only 1 flight a day on KLM Airlines, so during those peak seasons, it will sell out pretty quickly, and then you're pretty much going to have to be flexible with your dates or your air carrier. Besides, just saying that Kilimanjaro is the type of trip that you would want to prepare for pretty far in advance. It's not one of those destinations that you book at the last minute.
So how many days does it typically take to trek Kilimanjaro, and how many hours can a person expect to be trekking each day? This is probably one of the most important questions that people ask us when they're evaluating whether or not they're ready to do the trip.
So there are numerous routes on Kilimanjaro, so it really depends on which route you're doing and how many days it takes, but it could be anywhere from 5 to as long as 8, even 9 days to do the treks. Some companies do some of the treks in 5 or 6 days. We do not recommend that because you're ascending really high, really fast, and this is a very difficult trek on the body because of the quick ascent. So the longer the trip, the better it will be for both your success rate and also your acclimation rate. So our Kilimanjaro trek is 8 days or 7 days, and that's pretty standard as with a lot of companies. But like I said, some companies will do a little bit shorter. So I'd say go for the longer, as long as you can. And how many hours per day does it take? You're climbing very, very slowly on Kilimanjaro. The words that the local guides will use is pole pole, which means slowly, slowly. And you really do have to walk slowly, slowly. So it literally is step, 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 step. And if you try to walk faster than that, they will tell you to slow down because that is all part of the acclimation process. And when we see people who are trying to walk faster, those are the people who we see have trouble with the trek. So on average, a typical day is 8 hours. However, summit day is a big day, and I've climbed Kilimanjaro 3 times, and every single summit day, it was a 16-hour day.
Why is it that the summit day is a longer day?
You start at midnight, or sometimes you start at 11, depending on how the group is going. If the guides feel that the group should start a little bit earlier, they will have them start at 11, just to make sure that everyone the goal is to get up to the peak at sunrise. So if you start at 11 or midnight, you start the slog up, and it's pretty much until the sun comes up that you get going up, which is about 6 to 6:30 in the morning. So 6.5 hours up. And then you come back down to the Barafu camp. Actually, it depends on which trek you're doing. On the trek that we do at Bike Hike, it's the Machame route. And you come back down to the Barafu camp. You have a big breakfast at the Barafu camp and maybe a nap, which is actually a very good idea, of about an hour. And then you climb all the way down to 10,000 feet. So you're actually, on this summit day, you're going from 15,000 to 19,000 and all the way back down to 10,000. It's a pretty big day. Again, it's going to be different with every route there is, but so I'm focusing here on the Machame route.
All right. Okay. So another thing that people are always wondering about is how can they evaluate their fitness and how can they train and prepare themselves for Kilimanjaro?
So Kilimanjaro is rated as a strenuous trip. And what makes that strenuous is definitely long days and the altitude. So it's not really easy to train for altitude unless you live at altitude or you can get somewhere where you can go on a trek at altitude just to see how you do at altitude. But the effects of altitude only last a few days while you're acclimating. So that's besides the point. I think the most important part for training for a trip like this is to make sure that you get out on some long hikes of 8 hours. I'd say start prepping at least 4 to 6 months in advance where you're going on good long hikes you don't really have to carry things on your back except a day pack because that will be all that you'll have to do on the Kilimanjaro trek. But you really want to get the distance and the mileage under your belt. And in my experiences, the last day was the hardest day because we actually did a total of 10,000 feet. No, sorry, more than that. We went from 15 to 19 and all the way down to 10 in one day. That's significant. So it's hard on the knees. So when you're thinking about doing your training, think about doing some long treks where you're actually getting in some good ascending and descending.
Mhm. So yeah, even something that has sort of like a natural staircase kind of thing happening, so you get that sort of sense of going down too with your knees, because that can
Exactly.
definitely really be
Yeah,
hard.
and hiking poles, I'm not one for hiking poles normally, but on Kilimanjaro, hiking poles I'd say are almost mandatory because it's just one of those treks where you don't have a lot of energy when you don't have a lot of oxygen flow coming in. So hiking poles just really help to put one foot in front of the other on that
Mhm.
summit day. And even on the downhill, they take a lot of the weight off of the knees.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so is that something that's provided, or is that something that someone would have to pack to go?
Somebody would have to pack those on their own, although they can be rented in Tanzania.
Okay, so sort of along those lines then, one of the questions that we get as well, and a very important question, is how can you prevent, or can you prevent altitude sickness? Like, what do you advise people do before and during the trek?
So the Kilimanjaro trek is definitely a very serious climb because of the quick ascent that you're doing on this trip. You're going probably from 2,000 to 19,000 feet in 6 days, 5 to 6 days. So you want to start off well rested. And coming from North America, you have jet lag working against you to begin with. So if you can, try to build an extra day into the beginning of the itinerary to help to alleviate any jet lag if possible. Ideally, do not start your trek the very next day after arrival because you have
You'd be so exhausted to begin with.
so you're starting
and then-
off on a negative right from the start. Make sure that as you are climbing, you're climbing very slowly. In Tanzania, they use the words pole pole. You will hear that a lot. And pole pole means slowly, slowly. And slowly, slowly is all to help in acclimation. So, and it literally is step, step, step. And if you're feeling anxious because you can't walk that slowly, just listen to your guides because they have done these treks countless times, hundreds of times, and they know what they're talking about when they tell you that you have to do it slowly. Make sure that you are keeping yourself really well hydrated on the trek. You should be drinking a minimum of 3 liters of water per day. You want to make sure that you're climbing high by day and sleeping lower. So you want to ask that to the tour company that you're booking your tours with. How high are you climbing in one day, and what altitude are you sleeping at that night? Because that will also help with acclimation. And you want to also make sure that you're getting good night's sleeps, which can be difficult for a lot of people at altitude because a lot of people may not sleep at altitude. Number one, because lack of oxygen, and number two, because it's cold. So make sure that you bring the proper gear with you so that you're not cold in your sleeping bag, because that will definitely help with a night's sleeping on the ground. And make sure to keep taking deep breaths and not to overexert yourself. If you overexert yourself on the trek, it's one of the worst possible things you can do. Really take it easy, slowly, slowly, slowly. If you're having problems carrying your day pack, let your guide or your porter carry your day pack.
It's not a race to the top at all.
Definitely not a race to the top. And we hear a lot of people say, what's your success rate? I want to make sure that I'm getting to the summit. I want to book with a company that I'm absolutely ensuring that you're going to get me to the summit. That's not the right mentality to take. Altitude is physiology, and you have to make sure if we spot somebody who is starting to have acute mountain sickness, it's without question they're being turned back, and the guide makes that decision. So, I mean, the best thing that you can do is really follow all those steps. Oh, and I forgot to mention, sorry, Diamox. It's a prescription drug that you can get prescribed from your doctor, and it's a diuretic, and it does help with altitude, so you can prepare with that in advance which can help with altitude as well. And that actually leads to another point, that if you have any health concerns whatsoever, asthma, heart condition, it is definitely advisable to speak to your physician in advance to make sure that this trek is an appropriate trek for you to be doing. Asthma in particular is one that I have seen issues over the years with people who have asthma. So you definitely want doctor's clearance.
So the next question, it's whether or not oxygen is supplied in cases of emergencies. So if something were to go wrong and someone were really in need of oxygen, would it be supplied by the companies?
So it really varies with the company. We do carry oxygen, but the oxygen is only used for an absolute emergency. If someone needs oxygen, it's not used to get them to the top. If anyone requires emergency oxygen, they need to start heading down as quickly as possible. Because if you are getting to the point where you need oxygen, you're probably getting into the effects of acute mountain sickness, which is cerebral and pulmonary edema.
At the end of the day, it comes down to getting you down to safety.
Exactly.
How would someone know if they had altitude sickness? What are the symptoms?
So, first of all, there's 4 factors that relate to acute mountain sickness. That's high altitude, the fast rate of ascent, the exertion on the body, and dehydration. So the main cause is climbing too high too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So at about 10,000 feet, 75% of climbers will all experience some mild symptoms. And those would be shortness of breath, increased heart rate, headache, nausea and dizziness, loss of appetite, fatigue, and restless sleep. Some climbers will start to experience moderate acute mountain sickness symptoms, and those would be a more severe headache and not relieved by regular headache medication, nausea and vomiting, weakness, fatigue, shortness of breath, and decreased coordination.
Okay.
The symptoms of severe acute mountain sickness will include shortness of breath at rest, the inability to walk, the loss of mental acuity, and the fluid buildup in the lungs. So that's
really serious.
That's very serious. That would be cerebral edema or pulmonary edema happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And this will require at minimum 1,500-foot descent immediately, and they will have to be hospitalized and evacuated. So this is where it's really important that you're choosing a company to travel with that has guides that are very well trained in high altitude mountain rescue. Basically, you want to make sure that you're telling your guides if you're taking any medications.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important that they are aware of that information. If anyone is starting to experience any severe altitude sickness, then it's a non-negotiable turnaround, and the guides basically have that right to turn them around. There are wheeled stretchers that porters can carry people down who are not able to walk on their own. They're not the most comfortable, but they can get them down really fast. Those porters are very fast and they're very strong. And unfortunately, there's no helicopter access, so their helicopter rescues are not a possibility on Mount Kilimanjaro.
So basically, it's up to the porters to just as efficiently as possible get them down on the stretchers or whatever the case.
Yeah, and the porters are very strong. Like literally, these guys are climbing the mountain hundreds of times per year, up and down. And I know what it felt like to do it twice in a row, but these guys are unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. And so you said that it's important to choose a company that has their guides well trained. How can someone look into that? How can they find out? Like, how do you know?
You really want to look at, first of all, how long has a company been around and running trips in Kilimanjaro? You want to make sure that you're picking an ethical company. So there's a huge variation of price range for Kilimanjaro treks. And one of the most important factors is you want to make sure that the companies you're working with are paying their employees fair wages, that their guides are trained well. So if you're paying minimal for that trip, you have to question how much those porters and cooks and guides can be getting paid, and what kind of skill level would those guides have if they're getting minimal pay. Companies who have had the same guides for many years have a very good track record of really taking care of their employees. And there's a lot of porters who start their own companies, and it's just one of the main things that's happening in Tanzania. And I've heard that the focus is to get the clients to the top no matter what, because if they don't get the clients to the top, they don't get tipped. So I think it's just really important to ask a lot of questions, read reviews on TripAdvisor of the companies, ask the companies if you can have references from some of their past clients, and really look at their track record. Bike Hike has been running for 15 years on Kilimanjaro. So we've been doing it for a long time, and we work with amazing people, and it's an expensive trip. It's our most expensive trip, but we will refuse to cut corners in a place of all destinations like Kilimanjaro, which is a very, very severe mountain, and we only work with the very best over there.
Yeah, that's really important, because on a trek like this, where it's not just about doing something physical, but it's actually putting your life at risk, and you're putting your life in other people's hands. So you want to make sure that you're not going with a company that is cutting any corners.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question that we get a lot: what are the different possibilities for routes to get to the top? Because there's a lot of different routes, obviously, to the top on Kilimanjaro. And so what are the different routes? And then also, how technical is the climb? Because people want to know that. They want to know what the technical challenge aspect of the climb is.
So there are 6 routes to get up to the top of Kilimanjaro. And those are the Marengu, the Machame, the Lemosho, the Shira, the Rongai, and the Umbwe. So, and of those, pretty much the Marengu route is known as the Coca-Cola route. It's very popular. It's known to be the least scenic of all of the treks, and it has huts along the trails. The Machame is one of the most popular routes. That's the route that we do. And Machame is also known as the whiskey route, and it's very, very scenic. Lemosho is another one of the routes. We actually start going through Lemosho on our Machame route. And Lemosho, I've not done the full Lemosho trek, so I can't give you full details about it, but you start in a forest, and there's the possibilities of seeing game in the forest on the Lemosho route. The Machame route starts on a forest as well, but where the Lemosho route starts, there's a possibility of seeing elephants, baboons, things like that. There's also Shira, Rongai, and Umbwe, which I have never actually participated in, but they are known to be quite wonderful as well. And how technical. So the climbing is not technical at all. They all start off in forests and end off in forests because you're at the lower altitudes. They start off, depending on the season, the trails can be very muddy or they can be very dry. So you sometimes might be walking in ankle deep mud ponds, not ponds, but pools, as well as walking on a trail. And then you'll eventually get out of the forest and you'll get into an area that has brush, scrub, and big wide open spaces and interesting trees and topography at that level. And then you'll eventually get above the tree line. And again, it'll be big wide open spaces, paths going along the trails. There is, on the Machame route, there is something called the Barranco Wall. And that's just almost like a staircase that you're climbing up. It's not quite a staircase, but it looks a little like a staircase. If anybody has a fear of heights, that's maybe the only spot that would be a little bit challenging for them, but it's not that bad, but there's nothing where you're climbing with ropes, no ice axe or anything like that. You might get snow at the top, depending on the season that you're going. If you're going during the colder seasons, you definitely may have snow at the top. As soon as you reach the summit, just before the summit, there's a big section of scree, which is just loose rock, and that can be challenging because it's either one step up and two steps down, or depending if you're coming up or down. Coming down, I find it easier to just run down it. Dig your heels in and just run. But in terms of being technical, it's not a technical climb. It's what makes Kilimanjaro challenging is the altitude.
Mm-hmm. In terms of how much, so we've kind of touched upon this already, saying that trekkers only really have to bring their day packs, but how much do they have to actually pack into their day pack? Like, how heavy will it be? And then how much can they actually allocate for the porters to carry for them?
So pretty much in your day pack, you should consider that what you'll need from the time you leave your campsite in the morning until you get back to your campsite in the evening. So you might want to have a Gore-Tex jacket if you're not wearing it, a fleece or a down jacket if you're not wearing it, hat, gloves, your packed lunch if today's lunch happens to be a packed lunch, any snacks, and your water. That's all you need to have in that day bag. In the bag that the porters will carry, some companies will provide that bag for the group, and they have to fill that to the porters. And other companies, the clients have to bring those bags on their own. But there is a weight limit, a maximum weight limit from the porters, and that is 20 kilos per person per bag. So now there are some companies who have reportedly been bribing the officials to cut corners and be more competitive in their pricing. So it's another question that you do want to ask the tour company that you're working with. On average, there should be about 4 staff per trekker to ensure that there's enough of that weight distribution is going amongst all of the different staff members.
Wow, that is a really high ratio. And then the expenses make a lot more sense when you think about that, the fact that there should be a 4-to-1 staff to client ratio. Yeah,
definitely. In terms of the bathroom situation, there are bathrooms on the mountain. When I was there many moons ago, actually the last time I trekked Kilimanjaro was 10 years ago, and the bathroom situation was horrendous. I have heard it has improved quite a bit since then. The park rangers basically dig the holes and put a tent up around the hole with a little seat. It's not a seat on it, but it's just 2 pieces of wood. And they do maintain those washrooms. Unfortunately, there's some trekkers who don't really take care of those, and sometimes they tend to miss those holes, and it can be pretty bad, but I have heard it has improved. There are some companies that do carry private washrooms along the trek as well, and those private washrooms are great, but it will raise the trip prices quite a bit because they do actually need to have an extra couple of porters along who will carry the toilet tents with them, and all the waste will go out as well.
Okay, and what about the overall trekking conditions? Like, what more could you tell us about the sort of trekking condition itself, in terms of how cold it is, what the highest altitude you'll reach, those sorts of things?
Okay, so the trekking conditions, pretty much the trekking conditions will be that, as I mentioned, big wide open spaces. You're camping from every single day once you start the trip. And there's porters and cooks along on the treks as well. So the porters will go ahead of you and they will put the tents up. The cooks will be cooking hot meals for you, depending on the trekking company, of course. And so really, from the trekker's perspective, it's just a matter of getting from A to B. When you get to your campsite, everything is well prepared for you. You will get a basin of water twice a day, and that basin of water will be to have a sponge bath because there are no showers on Kilimanjaro. So you'll have that, and then you'll have your hot cooked meals, and you've got your little base camp that you will move with you every night. And how cold will it be? So this, you mentioned how cold is it at the top. The top is obviously going to be the coldest because it's going to be the highest. So all 3 times that I've trekked was during August, and August is one of the cooler months. So at the top, it was minus 20. On summit night.
Are we talking degrees or Celsius?
Minus 20 Celsius, which is approximately 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was very cold, and we're starting 11 p.m. midnight, so you're in the middle of the night. So as soon as the sun comes up, it will warm up a bit, but it is definitely cold, and you're walking slowly, so you definitely have to be prepared for that. If you get cold extremities, that can definitely be a factor, which happens to me, and I brought toe warmers and hand warmers, and they don't work up there because there's not enough oxygen in the air. So the highest altitude, the summit of Kilimanjaro is 19,341 feet above sea level, and it is the highest freestanding mountain in Africa.
People are also wondering about what the meal situation is during treks.
So pretty much you're mostly having hot meals 3 times per day. So it depends, like, again, there are cooks along on all the treks, and this is a dining tent. So we have a kitchen tent, which is where the cooks cook, and then there's a dining tent, which is where the participants will be eating. So, and breakfasts are usually quite big, include things like porridge, eggs, sausages, fruit, bread. Lunch is cooked if it's something where we arrive at the camp that day. If it's something where then it's going to be a hot meal. So if you're trekking and it's an early day where we get to the camp by lunch, it's a hot meal of, some type of meat, vegetables, a starch. And then if it's something where we will be taking lunch to go with us, it'll be a packed lunch, and it will have sandwich, eggs, cheese, juice, fruit, water, things like that. And then when you get to the camp, there will be a snack, usually cookies, popcorn, hot tea, hot chocolate, things like that. And then there'll be a hot meal at dinner as well. And again, that'll be some type of meat, a starch, vegetables, and dessert. So you definitely eat very well on the trek. Except on the summit day, when you're leaving at 11 p.m., it's not advisable for you to have a big meal before that trek. So it's a very, very light meal that you have, very light. And then when you start trekking at midnight, you won't even be hungry on that last day, because one of the symptoms of altitude is that you lose your appetite. So you do the trek, and then when you come back down to the 15,000 foot mark, then you will have a big meal at that point. And just one point about this, 15,000 feet on the Machame route is the last camp before the summit. So that's a 4,000 foot gap between the summit and the last camp. And the reason for that is because there are no more water stops along the way between the 15,000 foot mark and the end and the summit. And if I can just mention one more thing on that one, which
go for it.
mention about, is water. Water is boiled the whole way for the trekkers.
Right, that's a good point.
So water will be at the end of the day, and in the morning, the guides will refill everybody's water bottles, and you'll be taking boiled water with you along the way. So you don't have to worry about water purification tablets or anything like that.
Perfect. Okay, so I think we just have about 1 or 2 more questions of our preset questions to cover. The next one is cell reception. Is there cell reception on the mountain?
There is cell reception on the mountain, believe it or not. Not everywhere, so there are specific points, and the guides know where those points are, where you will get cell reception. I had, on one of the treks that I was on, somebody brought a satellite phone with him and paid a fortune for it, but I was getting cell reception and sending text messages from the top.
Yeah, so, and it's probably getting better year by year. So if that was a while ago, I mean, yeah, it's probably.
Yes.
Okay, so basically the last question here before we go into some of the questions that people have emailed, and this is a very important one though. How much do you recommend tipping the guides, cooks, and porters that have been working so hard for the trekkers for the duration of the trek?
So plan on spending approximately $250 US per traveler for tipping. Now this could vary depending on the size of the group. It could be a little more, it could be a little less. But generally, what we're suggesting to break that down is for porters, we're suggesting a total of $5 US per day per porter, and that's divided between the group. So if you have a group of 20 porters, each porter is getting about $5 US per day.
Mm-hmm.
The cook, we suggest a total of $50 US for the entire trip. The assistant cook, we suggest a total of $40 split between the group. And then the assistant guide would be about $70 split between the group. And the head guide would be about $100 split between the group.
So that all adds up to the $250.
Yes.
That a person should have in mind for.
And that's why I say it depends on, that $250 could go a little higher or lower depending on the size of the group. Because if it's a group of 12 people, everybody doesn't have to put in as much if it's a group of 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you should do with those tips is what will happen at the end of the trip is that all the porters and the cooks and the guides will say goodbye to you, and somebody should bring along an envelope, where 4 envelopes, in fact, where they can be divided for the guide, the assistant guide, the cooks, and the porters. Don't give all the tips to the head guide, and ask the head guide to split accordingly, because it'll cause a lot of friction between everyone, all the other staff, because they might think that somebody's taking an unfair share and not giving the amount to the porters. And this is important for them because they work really hard. If you see how hard they work, they deserve a very good tip. So, yeah.
So this is something that trekkers can sort of start to discuss and plan amongst themselves as they're going up the mountain to sort of see who's going to be in charge of that on the last day and get that all organized and then hopefully planned out so that it's not an awkward situation of people scrambling at the end trying to figure out their tips and how to get it to the right people. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we're just going to move into the questions that have been emailed. There's a couple that have been emailed and then one that's been typed in the sidebar here. So we will just get to those. So the first question is there a restriction on the number of climbers on Kilimanjaro's trails that you know of?
There are no restrictions on the limits in Kilimanjaro, not like there are in Peru. That might come at some point, but at the moment there are no restrictions.
Okay, and then another question is where are the porters and guides from during the Tanzania trip, and can they speak English?
Yep, so all of the porters and guides are local, and same with the cooks, they're Tanzanians. And oftentimes what will happen, well, in our situation anyway, the guides have all started as porters and worked their way for years as porters until they made it up to the assistant guide and then eventually got up to the head guide. So they have climbed the mountain countless times. when I actually, oh, and they do speak English. Not the porters. The porters often do not speak English. The guides will definitely speak English. The cooks will not speak English for the most part. Um, maybe there'll be a few broken words that they can speak, but for the most part, they won't speak English. And these porters and guides pretty much are summiting the mountain every week because there's, especially in season, they'll be going up, come back down, have a couple of days to wash their clothes and do whatever they have to do, and they're back up the next day. So they're pretty experts at what they're doing.
And do you get the sense that they're enjoying their life as guides going up and down the mountain every week?
Yeah, it's very, very difficult work, especially for the porters, because when you see the type of work that they're doing at that altitude, it is definitely challenging work. But to work in tourism in Tanzania and many countries around the world is one of the better jobs that you can have, because there's a lot of opportunity, there's money to be made in tourism. So they are enjoying it. I don't think that they continue doing it as long as they have been if they weren't. There are more restrictions coming in Tanzania for the porters and guides in the last decade, which is very good, because in the beginning there were no restrictions, and there were a lot of companies who really, to save money, would, as I mentioned earlier, they would have less porters because they didn't have to pay as many people to carry more gear. They would not bring tents for the staff, so the staff was sleeping outside. And years ago, there was actually a death that happened of one of the porters because one of the companies did not bring a tent.
Oh, wow.
And restrictions have come in place by the government since then. I still think there's a long way for them to go to put more restrictions in place for some of those companies who, are doing things maybe on a more budget level. But those are definitely kind of questions to ask the tour provider that you're traveling with, how those porters and guides are treated. Are they paid fair wages, etc.?
Definitely. Okay, so the last thing that we were emailed is, are there many cultural aspects to this trip, or is it a purely physical trip? And if a person wanted to add some more culture to the trip, how could you add on cultural experiences while in Tanzania?
So Tanzania is an amazing place because there's so many cultural aspects to the country itself. Kilimanjaro is not a place that is a cultural destination. The only cultural aspect that you'll have on Kilimanjaro is the porters and the guides, and those porters and guides have been around tourists a lot. So that's not an authentic cultural experience. If you add on a safari, you will encounter some Maasai, but really, again, the focus there is going to be
The wildlife.
And, the staff who are used to being around tourists a lot. So if you really want to add on some additional time, think about adding on some time biking through the villages or hiking through the villages. Zanzibar is actually an interesting place to add on. It's on the coast, off the coast of Dar es Salaam, and it's almost like going to another country. There's spice markets, there's amazing beaches, there's definitely culture on Zanzibar, but I think really on the mainland, like adding on some of the areas, even in Arusha or Moshi, the towns, just to spend some time going to the bomas of the local people, which is the homes that they live in.
Okay, so just to kind of add on to that question that we were emailed, and then we'll close things up. How long of a trip would a person have to have if they wanted to have the Kilimanjaro experience and then add something like this on? Like when you do an add-on for someone, how long are they usually spending in Tanzania as a whole? Like how much of a break from work or whatever would they have to do this to really do it?
So if you are looking at doing Kilimanjaro and a Serengeti Ngorongoro trek, or not trek, sorry, safari, you really need to give yourself, including flight times, probably 16 days, because it's a pretty long flight to get in and out of there, at least 24 hours, if not more, from wherever you're coming from. And then, a good 14 days on the ground. If you want to add in Zanzibar, which is definitely something very well worth it, I'd give yourself an extra 5 days to a week, so making it a 3-week trip. And by having Kilimanjaro, a safari, and Zanzibar, it's almost like going to 3 countries in one trip. Every place is absolutely different from each other. A Tanzania trip is not a cheap trip. It is definitely, there are a lot of high fees associated with the parks and the Serengeti, the Kilimanjaro climbs, park fees, and so forth. So, yeah, if you can take 3 weeks at once, I highly recommend it because, when are you going to be back that far?
Yeah, then you can get the most out of going that far and really experience it fully.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. If you had any questions that we didn't answer, you can always email us at info@bikehike.com. We're always on the other end of the email and happy to answer your questions there. Or you can also call us as well. We're always happy to take your calls. And our phone numbers are...
If you're calling from anywhere in North America, you can call us at 1-888-805-0061. And if you're calling from Canada or Vancouver or anywhere internationally, you can call us at add a 1 for international, 604-731-2442.
Perfect. So we're just an email or a phone call away for the rest of your questions about Kilimanjaro or any of the other trips that Bike Hike offers. And we will be posting this particular webinar on YouTube, so you can reference it again and listen to these answers over again or send them to anyone you know who's interested in finding out about Kilimanjaro. And we'll be hosting another webinar soon on a topic to be announced, so stay tuned for that.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.